Welcome to this first of our two virtual lectures for this week. As I'm sure that you have figured out by now, although we do not have face-to-face lecture as such, I am asking you to watch the videos for these two chapters materials and then complete your weekly assignments as usual. So let's get started. This chapter 15 looks two larger themes: economics and urbanization. Remember that this video is going to give you only the basics, and it is recommended that you expand your knowledge from your textbook and full chapter slides. What is quite striking to me at last is that nowadays more than half of the world's population lives in cities. And it is predicted that for the next generation, this number will be 3/4 of all the people. That is a lot and a drastic change from the past. Remember, in the history, most of the people were involved directly in the acquisition of resources, doing jobs like gathering, farming, and fishing. All these activities that you can see in the picture on the top left corner. And these all require space for each individual or a group of individuals living in this way. So people were dispersed quite far apart from each other. Now, instead, we see these huge megacities. These are cities with a population of over 10 million people. So this is an interesting graph. It shows that the biggest growth of cities is taking place actually in the less developed countries. And if we look at this map, we see that it is indeed largely in these developing countries where the megacities are growing larger and larger. So let's consider what kind of consequences would arise from this. Well, firstly, when population grows faster than the infrastructure, it is the roads, transportation, housing, water supply, sewage treatment, schools, we end up with less than favorable living conditions. And when you add to that the fact that these rapidly growing cities in the developing countries have little money to spend on developing new infrastructure, or even housing for that matter, we often end up with horrible living conditions. This includes also problems with pollution and of course congestion. We see that even with wealthier cities in the developed world though. But let's remember that environmental science was not just about problems. It is very much also about solutions and what can be done to make things better. Here we have a picture of a more developed urban city where the history is also preserved as part of the cityscape. You can see quite a bit of greenery, people going on about their daily lives, sufficient infrastructure for transportation, while pedestrians are also considered, and all sorts of nice things. Cities can be, if well-developed and managed, places where innovation happens. Think of mixing of ideas as many people interact together, and experimentation. We can have more diverse employment opportunities than in the rural areas, which can be great. Think of that picture of early rural lifestyle that we saw of people needing to catch or gather their own food. We can also have more improved efficiency of the way of life. Think about how expensive it is to set up sewage systems or electricity for a single house in the middle of a forest. It is much cheaper per capita in a tightly populated area. So there are pros and cons to city living. And much of that depends on how the development and growth of a city is managed. So, how can we tackle this all and make sure that we make smart choices when preparing for the growth? Well, one way is definitely with a smart urban planning. One example of this is that I want to share with you is London Financial District. This is located right in the city center, and it is expensive there. Trust me, I used to live in London. What we find is that this is what we could describe as one of the nerve centers of the world's financial life. Businesses with expensive offices, fancy business lunches, selling and trading, all that. But with that comes the fact that the London Financial District is so overpriced that no one actually lives there. Instead, this by day bustling and vibrant and busy city center turns into a very empty and kind of deserted area by night. So this is something to consider when we talk about cities. They are not all alike and all the same. What London has instead, in my humble opinion, is an excellent public transport network. You get your world-famous London Underground and double-deckers and several major international airports that service London. And really, the transportation network passes a huge number of people during rush hours. It is quite amazing, really. But is this the case in all of the US historically? Why do not we see similar public transport network here? Well, historically the US cities were not designed for this, while most European cities were. And although we see some US cities adding light rail operations and other public transports to their offerings in the cities, this is still in comparison quite a little. Remember, we talked earlier on about the distances being great in the US. So, I guess that at this stage, we all would agree that cities can be made into very pleasant places to live in. We see some rather cute rooftop gardens here, so why is it often a problem to execute? Why are not all of our cities ideally built, optimal places to live in? I guess it comes down to money. I was first going to put here a video of Rihanna's "Be Better Have My Money," but then I thought that maybe I should not. Okay, so we have came to the end of our first video on chapter 15, and next we will look at the second half of this chapter, in particular sustainable development. Check out that video too.